welcome everybody. For those of you who might not know me, my name is Amy Patterson and I'm the Executive Director of the Connecticut Land Conservation Council. This is our second information session for our new program, the Connecticut Conservation Partnership Program. Before we get started, I wanted to ask a few things of you. Number one is to stay muted. You may put your questions in the chat anytime. I'll be monitoring the chat for questions while Yao does the presentation. And we may pause now and then for the questions in the chat, but most likely we're going to just wait until Yao's done with a certain section and then we'll go through those questions first. And then if you have other questions, I ask that you just raise your hand using the raise hand feature under reactions at the bottom of the screen. Yao, if you want to just demonstrate that, that would be great. And then when you're called on, you may unmute yourself and ask your question. It's a small group tonight, so there shouldn't be any problems with folks stepping on each other's toes. If there is any disruption in this meeting and we need to end it, you can sign back in using the same Zoom registration link that you used to get in. Before we launch into the presentation, I just want to give you a quick background on the program. In November 2020, CLCC submitted a grant proposal to the USDA-Natural Resource Conservation Service Regional Conservation Partnership Program. And the purpose of our proposal was to create a funding and technical assistance program for land trusts applying to Connecticut Dept's Open Space and Watershed Land Acquisition Grant Program, or OSWA. Unlike the more typical NRCS agricultural programs, the funding source to which we applied targets forest and watershed land protection, making the project criteria uniquely consistent with those of the OSWA grant program. We received the great news in April of 2021 that our grant had been approved in the amount of $6.7 million to establish a 5-year program, which will provide land trusts applying to OSWA with a federal source of match funds for their projects. For the past year, we have been very busy working with NRCS to put the necessary agreements in place with the federal government to launch the program. And while we were negotiating these agreements, we have also created a web page with information about the CCPP, which is the acronym for this program, like you needed another one, which you all have hopefully had a chance to look at. And at some point, when I'm done speaking and Yao's talking, we'll put that link in the chat for you, but you should easily find it on our website. With the federal agreements finally in place, we now will turn our attention to working through some essential steps with Dept and the Attorney General's office in order to proceed at the state level. With all that said, the purpose of today's session is to provide you with an opportunity to learn about the program, receive an overview, and with the next round of the OSWA grants having just been announced, encourage you to consider this program, the CCPP, to help you fund your transaction. You are entering at the ground level. We may not have answers to all of your questions tonight, but your questions will assist us in developing the program as we move forward. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our presenter, Yao Owusu-Darko, who is CLCC's project specialist and the CCPP administrator. Yao was instrumental in working with me to write the grant and in negotiating the agreements with NRCS. He is your main contact for the program. Also joining us tonight in assisting in answering your questions regarding the federal program is Carol Grasses, who is the Assistant State Conservationist for Programs at NRCS. And I believe I neglected to say this at the first session the other day, but we are so fortunate in Connecticut to work with the folks at NRCS here in the state. They have been an absolute pleasure to work with, and we would not have made it this far without their tremendous assistance and cooperation in helping us work through a lot of the issues that the national headquarters had for us in putting the agreements together, so we were able to proceed with this grant. So with that, I'm going to turn the program over to Yao. And again, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, Amy. I'm going to share my screen. All right. Okay. So I'd like to start off this presentation with a summary of the program. Then I'll get into some detail about the easement options you can choose from and how CLCC will be coordinating their application process with NRCS and some things we still need in place for this program to work well. After I go through each easement option, I will pause to take your questions and or clarify anything you need me to. And the slides are numbered, so if you have a question on a particular slide, please note the number and we can come back to it. All right. So what is the Connecticut Conservation Partnership Program, CCPP? CCPP is a public-private partnership between CLCC and Dept. It is funded by the USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service, and CLCC has partnered with the Northwest Connecticut Land Conservancy and Connecticut Farmland Trust to help us implement this project. CCPP is a 5-year federal easement program that enables land trusts that have or intend to submit an open space grant to Dept to apply through CLCC for federal match funds. And the projects considered under this program are forest and watershed lands and agricultural lands that are consistent with OSWA program criteria for farmland preservation. So who could apply to CCPP? CT land trusts that have or intend to apply to OSWA, but also land trusts that have received an OSWA award notification but have not yet closed on their projects. There are 2 easement options under this program, and they are entity held easements and US held easements. In the following slides, I will describe the easements, the funding scenario associated with each, and some of the technical aspects of each. So starting with entity held easements, these are easements acquired and held by an eligible entity. And in the case of this program, that eligible entity will be a land trust. And we'll be dealing with one funding scenario under this under entity held easements. So we have a land trust A, that seeks to purchase title to OSWA and partners with another land trust B, which is the eligible entity to hold the federal easements. And so in this scenario, this partnership between land trust A and land trust B is needed because you cannot hold title to the property and also hold the federal easements. And in this scenario, land trust A would own the title and land trust B will hold the federal easements. So land trust B will work with land trust A to apply through CLCC for NRCS funding for the federal easement. And at closing, the landowner will receive a combination of OSWA and NRCS funds. And the partnering land trusts are responsible for the long-term stewardship and monitoring of the easement. So level of funding. So what level of funding can you expect with entity held easements? So NRCS will contribute between 25% to 50% of the easement value to the transaction. And this is subject to the CT general statute limit of 90% of a property's fair market value when combining state and OSWA funds. And I'm gonna skip ahead to just illustrate this level of funding. So let's look at 3 different scenarios. So in the first 2 scenarios, this is without CCPP. So suppose we have a property that is valued at $1 million. And in scenario 1, the land trust has to raise that $1 million in order to purchase this property. In scenario B, the land trust receives an OSWA grant in the amount of $500,000 and has to raise the additional $500,000 in order to buy the property. Now, if we turn our attention to the third scenario in which the CCPP grant applies. So again, we have a property valued at $1 million and we have an easement valued at $300,000. And for entity held easements, NRCS again can contribute between 25% to 50% of the easement value. And so again, let's assume the land trust receives an OSWA grant in the amount of $500,000 and NRCS contributes the 50% of the easement value. So 50% of $300,000, that is $150,000. The land trust now has $650,000 to assist them in purchasing the property, and has to raise $350,000 as opposed to $500,000 or the $1 million. Go back here. So for entity held easements, NRCS will pay for these due diligence activities. They will pay for an appraisal tech review and an environmental record search. Land Trust A will pay for all other due diligence and acquisition activities. And so as a complement to this program, CLCC is developing a transaction assistance grant program to help with land trust seeking entity held easements. And this transaction assistance program will help the land trust pay for appraisal, can help the land trust pay for an appraisal, surveys, title certificates, and insurance, and recording fees. Okay. So what would the process look like for applying to this program? CLCC, we will hold a sign up. We will have an intake form for those interested in participating. And once you complete the intake form, you send it to us. We will review projects for their eligibility. We will complete NRCS applications and eligibility documentation on behalf of the land trust. We will rank, bundle, and submit these applications to NRCS. And after we submit the applications, NRCS will review projects for their eligibility. They will conduct a title review and an on-site inspection, and rank and tentatively select projects for funding. And prior to entering into any agreement with NRCS, a land trust must obtain an appraisal. And prior to the appraisal, a draft easement deed must be prepared and submitted to NRCS for their review. Okay, so to reiterate, land trust, in the case of entity held easements, are responsible for an appraisal, a survey and management plan, a baseline documentation report, and title and closing work. And NRCS is responsible for reviewing due diligence activities and an environmental record search. After closing, the land trust steward and monitor the easements. Okay. And things we're still working through. So for entity held easements, CLCC, we are working with CT Dept and NRCS to create a consolidated easement template that includes OSWA and NRCS terms. And for land trust, what you would have to work through is finding your land trust partner to hold the federal easements. Gonna pause right there for questions.
Go ahead, Jennifer.
You're on mute.
I guess I probably don't understand what an easement is enough, but why, with our land trust, we own all of our properties. My understanding is an easement, you don't own the property. Why would you do it this way?
So have you ever applied at East Granby? Have you ever applied to the open space grant program before?
I don't think so, no.
So when you apply for state or federal funding, and in this case, you're applying for money to purchase title to the property, in consideration for the grant funds that the state and the federal government provide to you, they want an interest in the property in the form of an easement.
So they get the easement, the entity. Okay.
So let me just, but so in this case though, in the entity held easement scenario that Yao just described, Dept would hold the OSWA easement like it always does, but another entity, a land trust partner, or it could be a municipality, it could be the state, it could be a tribe, but most likely a land trust partner would be the easement holder to secure the federal funds. The federal government allows that. They will say, in this case, we will allow another entity to hold the easement in consideration for the funds that we, the federal government, have provided to you to help you purchase this property. And so that's the first scenario, is that you would work with a partnering land trust to hold the federal easement, and the state of Connecticut would hold the OSWA easement, and your land trust would own the property.
Okay, so this other entity, could they interfere or supervise or?
So their responsibility as an easement holder is to enforce the terms of that easement. So if, let's say that you as the East Granby Land Trust held an easement on a piece of property that was still owned by the private landowner, you as the easement holder have the responsibility to monitor and enforce monitor the property and enforce the terms of the easement. So your partnering land trust would have the responsibility as an easement holder to do that on property that you owned. Quite frankly, it's kind of an easy lift for a land trust to monitor another land trust, but that's the way this is structured under the federal guidelines. Dave and then Cam.
This is an interesting question. If the property owner is like the Regional Water Authority and they're selling the land, could they be the partner as an easement holder?
So in other words, if RWA is selling the land, they're the landowner selling the land to your land trust?
Correct.
Right, and then they would turn around and also seek to hold an easement. Carol Grassis, would you weigh in on that? So I want to make sure I got the scenario right, is that the Regional Water Authority is the landowner. They want to sell the property to the North Branford Land Trust. North Branford Land Trust would apply to OSWA, and OSWA, to buy the property. And what Dave, I think, is suggesting is that the Regional Water Authority would apply to NRCS to become the easement holder after they've sold the property. They would no
Correct.
longer own title anymore. It would go to
Right.
land trust.
But at the time of application, they would be the landowner, right?
Right,
Correct.
right.
I think we need another entity in there. I don't think that they could own the land and apply for federal funds for an easement, even if the intent was that at the time of closing that everything flip-flops.
Would they be
I can
able to-
definitely look into that and see if
Yeah.
that's something under the RCPP that they would consider.
Carol, what if they were able to have another land trust be an intermediate? The other land trust B, so to speak, would apply and do what we've just outlined here, but then ultimately assign the easement to the Regional Water Authority.
Yeah, after closing, there definitely can be any, that's definitely an option.
Yeah, so we can
We've
probably work
seen-
through that, Dave.
Easements be assigned.
So that comes into question, what's the time frame that this has to work into an OSWA grant?
So I think we have a slide to that effect now, but
Yes, we do.
yeah, why don't we pull it up and then I can certainly elaborate on what we've written here.
So yeah, we have the timeline will vary from project to project. And for those that have already received an OSWA award, but not yet closed, the federal process could take approximately 6 to 12 months. But for those that are applying for an OSWA grant at the same time as applying to this program, the federal process should be approximately the same as it is for OSWA.
So in other words, the goal is, again, putting aside, in the scenario where you're applying for basically both at the same time, they just opened up the new OSWA grant round. And then when we open this up later in the summer, early fall, if you applied for ours or the landowner applied for ours, you would be following pretty much the same track of timing. So that ultimately the goal would be you'd receive the funding around the same time so that you could close together and have all the money consolidated for the landowner. Cameron?
If I heard correctly, there'd be a baseline required. I don't think we prepare baselines in connection with the properties that we own, but for which we've gotten OSWA funding. They're pretty beefy documents, and the only baselines that we prepare and maintain are for the properties on which we only have conservation easements. Is it a requirement under this federal program that we have a full baseline document prepared?
Carol, do you want to answer that?
Oh, I'm muted. Yep, there we go. Yes, baseline documentation is absolutely required for the easement. That's going to be as it's named, the baseline that you would monitor off of going into the future. So each monitoring and stewardship event would reflect back on the baseline to determine if there've been any changes.
And that's,
And
sorry,
I
Carol.
think all, land trusts in general, for easements, they always have to have some kind of baseline.
And that's consistent with standards and practices.
Yeah.
Okay, Cameron, do you have anything else? Your hand's still up. Just want to make sure.
No, it's just, it's in our practice with OSWA grants, we have management plans for properties we own in fee, but there may be a state easement on them. But we have baselines and detailed baseline documents that we follow in connection with properties on which we only have a conservation easement. So this federal program would seem to require us to deviate a little bit from our state practice, and that's fine. I just wanted the answer to that. So.
Yeah, and actually it would, but it's consistent with it, because you wouldn't be holding the easement in the scenario we're describing. You'd be the landowner, another land trust would be the easement holder, so they would need a baseline documentation report. Other, Joe. Hi, Joe.
Hi, Amy, how are you?
Doing well.
Good, good. I had a question. It was, I think my question in the chat about timeframes was answered, but if you've already closed on acquiring a property, can you still apply for these matching grants, even with an OSWA grant that was granted after the, let's see, before I get the timing right. If you've acquired the property after the application of the OSWA grant, but you haven't applied yet for the CLCC and NRCS grant, can you still do that?
I believe we asked this question, and this is the scenario where, again, you've closed in the time frame that's allowable by DEP after the award has been announced, but you would be seeking funding for some reimbursement. You've got a bridge loan or something like that, and I believe that, and we'll confirm this, but I believe I posed that question to Tom Carroll, and the answer was no, that you would not be able to use the federal funds for any reimbursement purposes.
What about restoration or other acts on the property?
That would be a different program, Carol, is that correct?
Yeah, that would be one, through our EQIP program or something like that. Yeah. The problem is that once you've closed on the property under OSWA, now the land trust owns the land and they're not an eligible landowner to apply for funding. So that's one of the key things, is that at the time that the federal easement is placed, the landowner still needs to be an eligible landowner. So a private landowner, not a land trust.
And that's why the closing timing is very important, because it's kind of a in this case, it'll be one consolidated document, but it's still two interests that are being conveyed by that land trust, to that landowner, to the land trusts.
Seems like a challenge, given like in this past season with the OSWA grants, how they kept moving the deadline on the OSWA application, and we kept deciding to delay a purchase, and that's why I would be concerned about the closing deadlines. And now you're juggling more than just 2 or 3 parties. You're potentially juggling 4 or 5 parties.
I would respond to that by saying you're right, that the inconsistencies in the OSWA program have been difficult for everyone. And we're working really hard to get that program back on track to a consistent schedule, a predictable schedule for everyone's benefit, including, for DEP as well. The second thing that I was going to say, which of course now I can't remember about that, it'll come to me. I had another response to that as well, Joe, but I'll get back to you.
No, life's tough. I understand. We try to figure this out, but it just seems like we're juggling, thank
you. You've just jogged my memory. So what I was going to say is, it's not like this is unprecedented in terms of land trusts applying for federal and state funding. We have, and many of, I know, I recognize at least a couple of you whose land trusts have done that, where they've applied for an ACCP-AL program grant, for example, through NRCS, while also applying to OSWA. And it is a lot of juggling. It's complicated. And so one of the goals of this program is to route everything through CLCC for the federal easement and provide you with technical assistance. We would prepare the grant for you. We would hopefully take that burden off of you and bundle these grants together. So there is consistency in terms of timing with respect to the federal. We would be submitting them all at the same time for each round and acting as that go-between to try and make it easier for both the land trust and for Deep. So that's really the goal of this program, is to try and minimize some of those complications that are absolutely there when trying to combine federal and state funds. I'm outside, can you tell? There's no other questions, Yao. I think you, oh, Dave, you have another question?
Yeah, so if you haven't applied for OSWA yet, you're sort of, what I just heard, suggesting that we should just come to Yaw first and work the process through him to get both grants going at the same time. Is that what I'm hearing?
So I would say definitely contact Yao, but you know if you were planning on or thinking about an OSWA grant, you need to start moving on that, because the deadline is September 30th for those grants. We are definitely here to assist you in working through an OSWA application, as is Deep. Deep's role in this project as a partner is exactly what they do right now, which is to assist the land trust through the OSWA grant program. So yes, certainly come to us, but you know, if you're thinking about OSWA, then start moving along on that. And we're happy to talk through that with you. But we will prepare the federal application for you. We won't prepare the OSWA application for you, I guess, is probably the best answer that I can give to you. You're still responsible for your OSWA application, although we're there to guide you, but we will prepare the federal application for you.
Cool, thank you.
Right. Okay. So moving on from entity held easements, the second easement option under this program are US held easements. And these are easements acquired and held by NRCS on behalf of the US. And under this easement option, we will also be dealing with one funding scenario. So we have a land trust A, seeks to purchase title through OSWA and partners with NRCS to hold the federal easement. So in this scenario, the landowner, with assistance from the land trust, applies through CLCC for NRCS funding for the federal easement. And again, after closing, the landowner receives a combination of OSWA and NRCS funds. So the land trust owns title subject to OSWA and US easements. And NRCS, since NRCS is holding the federal easement, is responsible for the long-term stewardship and monitoring of it. So what level of funding can you expect with US held easements? And this depends on the easement's level of restriction, or what can and cannot be done with the easements. And so for the purpose of this program, we'll be dealing with a moderately restrictive and a highly restrictive easements. And so for a moderately restrictive easement, the landowner can be paid up to 75% of the easement's value. But for a highly restrictive easement, the landowner can be paid up to 100% of the easement value. We're gonna skip forward and look at this slide once more. So we know what happens without CCPP. The land trust can either raise the $1 million to purchase title to the property, or apply for the OSWA grant and receive the OSWA grant in the amount of $500,000, and then it's left to raise the extra $500,000. But with CCPP, with US held easements, again, we have a property valued at $1 million, and we have an easement that is valued at $300,000. So if we have the highest level of restriction, then the landowner can be paid up to 100% of the easement value, in this case, $300,000. So the land trust then has the OSWA grant in the amount of $500,000, and the CCPP grants in the amount of $300,000, 500,000, 300,000, that is $800,000. And the land trust is left to raise $200,000 as opposed to the $500,000 with just the OSWA grant or the $1 million. And this, once again, is subject to the CT general statute limits of 90% of the property's fair market value when combining state and federal funds. And for US held easements, NRCS will pay for the cost of due diligence and acquisition related activities. And this includes paying for the survey, the appraisal, title search, closing services, and other realty related services. So similar to the entity held easement process, for US held easements, we will hold a sign up. We will review projects for the eligibility. We will complete NRCS applications and eligibility documentation on behalf of the land trust. We will rank, well, on behalf of the landowner, we will rank, bundle, and submit the applications to NRCS. After we submit the applications, NRCS will review projects for their eligibility. They will conduct a title search and an on-site inspection. They will complete initial planning activities, and this includes cost estimates of the easements. They'll write an easement plan and gather information for a baseline documentation report. NRCS will then rank and tentatively select projects for funding. And once these projects are selected, the landowner will review and accept the tentative selection. So under US held easements, once again, NRCS will pay for an appraisal and to establish the easement's fair market value. They will make an offer to and enter into an agreement with the landowner. And once this agreement is executed, NRCS will obtain and complete all planning and closing activities. And after closing, NRCS will steward and monitor the easements. And for this slide, I would defer to Amy to speak on this.
Yeah, so again, as I had said before, it's not a new program for land trusts or a new process for land trusts to apply to the federal government for a grant and ASWA and combine the two and go to closing. And it is, but there have been some issues with that most recently in the last few years where the Attorney General's office has had some concerns about layering the US held easement and a state held easement. And therefore, with the entity held process, the one we just described before, we won't have that issue because it'll be one document. But in the US held easement, we still will have that issue of two easements, a federal easement and a state easement. So we are just starting now to work with Dept and ultimately the Attorney General's office to resolve that issue. It might require a technical correction in the statute that enables ASWA, but we have we're optimistic, and the Attorney General's office is as well, that we will get that corrected. But that is something that we're going to work on over the next few months. And if it requires a statutory correction, that will be through the legislative session in 23, which timing wise won't impact this process because by the time this all goes to or comes to fruition, the session would be over. But we wanted to bring that to your attention because, you know, when you look at the entity held easement and you look at the US held easement, there are a lot of things about the US held easement on its face that are more attractive than the entity held easement process. So we wanted to make sure you understood that there is this wrinkle that needs to be smoothed in order for that process to go without issue. Questions? It's a lot. Questions? Rebecca.
Yes, hi, sorry, I hope this is not a too naive a question, but what are the considerations that would lead a land trust to choose one mode over another? Like, you know, land trust plus other land trustee entity versus land trust plus NRCS?
So that's a great question. And it's a question that we have been posing to ourselves and to NRCS for the last year in terms of working through these issues, particularly when we have some sticking points with the US held easement and the recording issues. So that is one of them, is if you go with the entity held easement, you can avoid that issue of having to layer two easements. And in fact, we have a draft ready of the consolidated document that we will now send over to Dept and then have them go over with the AG's office. So we feel that will make that element of it easier. The other is maybe a little less tangible, but it's very consistent with all the work that we're doing and what many land trusts are now doing, and that is to be partnering with other land trusts to have greater conservation impact. And there are many small land trusts that do not feel that they have the capacity to go through this process alone and be an easement holder on its own, or even to work with another, with a federal or state agency. But there are larger land trusts in the state that do have that capacity to be an easement holder to assist a smaller land trust in working through a project. And we know that there are those regional land trusts right now that are doing just that, or offering to do that, and are interested in helping them that way. So it's a partnership opportunity for land trusts. And it could also, in that regard, it's very attractive to funders when they see these land trusts working together. So that's the less tangible, that is something that you have to, and this is why Yao was saying, what should you be doing next, is to be looking at your partners, talking to neighboring land trusts, and seeing if this is the type of relationship that will achieve greater conservation impact in your region. Maybe it's a property that is bordering two towns. Maybe it's a property that, because of its watershed nature, which is what this property is focused on, it will lend itself to a partnership between organizations.
Well, I guess just quickly, sorry, that's kind of my question. No offense to Carol or NRCS folks, but so unless you feel like you don't have a good local land trust partner, why would you choose why would you choose NRCS over another land trust? So, Carol, I'm just going to answer a little bit and then I'll turn it over to you, because I wanted to finish that thought, Rebecca, and that is, I'm sorry.
No, I think why would you choose NRCS as an easement holder over a partner is probably the way I'd flip-flop it. And I think when Yao enumerated some of the features of a US held easement, they are more attractive. You can get a higher level, they pay for all the expenses, but you're also dealing with this is the negative, you are dealing with a process that has to run through NRCS. And that is the entire easement approval process would have to run through NRCS. It'll take longer. And you don't have as much control. But when you're partnering with a local land trust, this is, to me, the positive element as well, is that, that's local land trusts working together, having more control, and not having to deal with as much oversight as you would otherwise if you're taking the federal easement. So I think you said, why would you choose NRCS over a neighboring land trust? My response would be, I wouldn't. I think I would be looking to encourage you to go the entity held route for a number of reasons, with the latter being probably the most compelling. Carol, would you agree, or do you have anything else to add there?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when we were looking at the two options, initially, I think in the short term, in that initial funding kind of mentality, you look at the US held easement and you go, oh, well, the US government's going to pay for everything. But the US government's going to pay for everything. And that means then the US government is going to be holding that easement. You're partnering with the US government for perpetuity. You're going to be stewarded and monitored by us. Not that we're heavy-handed or not nice people or anything like that, but we are just a bigger organization. And rules are rules kind of thing, where in entity held easements, like Amy and Yao have said, you're working in collaboration. It's a land trust that's working with another land trust. You speak the same language. There's a lot of flexibility in that relationship that you wouldn't necessarily have if me or my subsequent people are monitoring you going forward. So.
And I wanted to add one more thing, Rebecca, and that is, one of the elements that make the US held easement very attractive is that the government does pay for everything. Sure. And that's why today, I hope you all saw, and we will continue to hammer this home, that we have a new grant opportunity that we purposely sought out, because when we had applied for this program, our intention was to carve out some of this federal money for a grant program to pay for some of the due diligence expenses that land trusts would incur in moving forward with this program in coordination with OSWA. And we wanted to, or even without it, we just wanted to set up that program. And we weren't able to do that with the federal funds, but we have found a private donor who's willing to support us, understanding that by providing some grant funding for land trusts, whether you participate in this program or not, by the way, That program is available to you whether you go through ASWA, CCPP, or you just have a donation that you're receiving or you're purchasing outright and you need some assistance. That program is intended to do that. So hopefully that will also incentivize some land trusts to move towards the entity held easement process so that they get the benefit of those funds to offset what they might have received from the federal government.
That's great. Thank you for characteristically thorough and clear explanation. Thank you.
Anne Astorita, do you have a, there you go.
Thanks. I was just wondering, I know that September is the deadline, but what's a realistic timetable for tackling this? My land trust has received OSWA before I came on board, but things have changed quite a bit since then. So what's a realistic timetable?
So the September 30th deadline is for the OSWA program, which is out of our control. I mean, that's the state deadline for when they will accept your OSWA application. I would think that your application, you know, through our process wouldn't be ready to be submitted by us until later on. We probably, you know, if all goes as planned in getting the consolidated easement approved and then working through this issue with the US held easement, which might take again through the legislative session. But I would think that we will probably start to put your applications together for the federal program sometime after the OSWA applications are submitted. So I you know, but that being said, I think they'll be close enough in time, and you know how long everything takes. You know, the OSWA program can take 2 years to close. And so we think that that's why we're optimistic that even if we bundle our applications, submit them to NRCS later than September 30th, which is definitely going to be the case, to give everybody a chance to breathe and find their partners and figure out which way they want to go and work with us in that way, we'll still be able to catch up in the process and probably close, be able to bundle the two funds in time for the closing.
Thank you.
So I think it's kind of, you know, we're not feeling that sense of urgency. We want to make sure that we have dotted all the I's and crossed all the T's before we would put your application into the hopper. Cameron?
Conversely, with respect to OSWA grants that have already been issued, but there hasn't been a closing, what's the timeline for getting our materials to you?
It would be the same. I think the reason why that's a less, it would be about the same. So sometime in the fall, hopefully we will be all ready to, you know, you can start now working with Yao to start to fill out that intake form, since you know, most of the information, all of the information that you used to apply for OSWA can be basically cut and pasted and dropped into our intake form, which will help us tremendously when we prepare that federal application for you. So that's something you can start. That's something that you can start now, you know, anytime in working with Yao. But in terms of the ultimate timeline, just to finish the thought, Cameron, is, hey, Dennis, can you, Dennis, would you mind muting your phone there, Dennis Main? There you go. Oh, go ahead, Dennis, mute it up. There you go. The reason why we say it'll be a shorter timeline is because you're not going through the entire OSWA process. Then you're just focusing on the federal program. And with so much of the work having been done to prepare for your OSWA grant, that's where that kind of 6 to 12 month timeline that we outlined in Yao's slide came from. So figure about a year.
It sounds as if our papers with respect to an already granted OSWA funding would go in after September 30th, along with all of the others that are going to, you know, be applying for OSWA funds now. And that's fine. But is there a prohibition against there being two applications into NRCS at the same time? As I think there is a prohibition for there being two applications into Dept at the same time.
I mean, I was shaking my head no on that, but Carol, you're the ultimate, you know, you're the ultimate on that. So that, in other words, if they have two applications to the CCPP program, one for an OSWA program, an OSWA grant that has already been approved but not yet closed, and another for an OSWA grant that was just submitted and is pending, two separate projects.
With two separate projects? Oh, yeah. No, that's fine.
Thank you.
The other thing, Cameron, I just wanted to mention that, when we were putting this program together, one of our goals was to be able to help to first help the land trust that might be struggling to close on their OSWA projects because they can't seem to find the match money to get to closing. And so if we have multiple land trusts come forward with that scenario, that first scenario where, hey, we're already approved in OSWA, but we need money, we'll bundle those and get them through probably quicker than we will in working with the land trusts that haven't had that information already gathered for their application that they have just or just putting together now. So there's flexibility here, and we've never done this before, so we're going to let this unfold. And thankfully we have, like I said before, and I mean it, we have an unbelievably cooperative NRCS office here in the state to work with us, and we will just let this unfold, like I said, and make it work.
Thanks.
Any other questions?
We have one question in the chat
Oh, thanks, Yao.
from Rick. What happens if down the road the two land trusts decide to merge?
That's a great question. And, in that case, if you think about the scenario, you've got one land trust. And I'm assuming, Rick, you mean that one land trust owns the property and the land trust with which it's merging holds the easement. And in that case, I think we would have to look to see whether the easement should be assigned to another land trust. So that, because in that case, the owner of the property would also be holding the easement, and that's not acceptable. So it would have to be an assignment. That's the way my gut reaction to answering that question. And Carol's nodding her head. So
That's absolutely correct. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just looking at Joe's comment. Our last OSWA grant application took approximately 3 to 4 months to put together. Joe, do you mean the application itself or post-award to closing? I'm assuming you mean the application itself.
The data package that had to go into
Yeah.
the application.
Yeah, and you only have until September 30th this round. And so that's why I say, get on it now. If you're even thinking about an OSWA grant, get on it now. And by the way, we haven't announced it yet because we just confirmed with Deep, but you're hearing it first tonight that July 14th, we're going to have an OSWA info session in partnership with Deep, and Allison Clark will be presenting the information, highlighting some of the changes in the application this year and the process. So we will announce that next week along with some other things in our e-news, but just mark July 14th. I think we said 12:30. Yeah. July 14th at 12:30 will be the OSWA info session. Any other questions? Yeah, do you have anything else? I can't remember.
Yes, 2 more slides.
Okay.
And one of them we've already covered. So we already covered the timeline, but I'll just repeat it again. And the timeline will vary from project to project. And so for those that have received an OSWA award, but not yet closed, the federal process could take approximately 6 to 12 months. And for those that are applying for an OSWA grant, the federal process should be approximately the same as it is for OSWA. We're gonna skip this slide. So next steps, start to plan your project. So send Yao, me, any questions you may have about the program. On July 4th, after July 4th, we will announce the intake form. So watch out for that. Review the project intake form, and I will be there to help you fill it out. And contact me to set up a one-to-one consultation about what you're thinking about in terms of which easement option you may want to choose from, or whether you just want to talk about a potential partner land trust. And yeah, contact potential land trust partners. And also, this afternoon, we sent out an email about our new transaction assistance grant program. So please submit a proposal, and you can submit a proposal for each project that you're currently working on or looking to take on. And this will allow us, your proposal will allow us and our funder to see the demand for this program, which will hopefully translate into more funding for it. And this is my contact information. I will also put this in the chat. And yeah. Does anyone have any questions?
Okay, well, seeing none, and this is just the beginning. It's funny. This program is a journey, and we are super honored to have received this grant, because our goal always is to put money in your pockets to make it easier for you to do deals and to save more land. I mean, that's the bottom line. And so we are, we will do what it takes to make this process as easy as possible for you, so that it will be an attractive option for you to bridge that gap between your open space grant and closing. So, we're here for you. We're really fortunate to have Yao. He's done such an outstanding job, and he's our dedicated staff for this program. So you shouldn't hesitate to contact him anytime. And if he doesn't know the answer, and I don't know the answer, or Carol doesn't know the answer, we'll find it out for you and make this as easy as possible. But let's get these applications in. Let's get going. Let's save some land in Connecticut. Let me see. I have some notes here. Let me just make sure I didn't miss anything important. Let me see. So we will continue to update you on the progress in developing that template for the consolidated easement for the entity held projects, and also working through the recording issues that I alluded to in connection with the US held easements that we are going to have conversations with both Deep and the AG's office, the Attorney General's office, on that. This presentation, as you know, has been recorded. We will have those recordings, the recording from this presentation, as well as Tuesday's presentation, available to you. Different questions were asked. It might be worth it for you to scoot, just kind of listen in and see. And we will add some of those questions to our Q&A section of the webpage that Yao had set up as well. And please, I can't emphasize what Yao said enough about the transaction assistance grant program. The more demand that we have for that program, the better and more compelling a case we can make with this funder that there is demand in Connecticut for it. We need this funding, and the money will be well spent. I think that's what their concern is. They want to make sure that if they provide us with funds, it will be spent down. And I'm certain that we have enough projects in Connecticut to make that worth their while. So that's all I have. Again, anyone going once, going twice for any last questions, but otherwise, you know where to find us. Contact us anytime and keep watching for information. We will provide it to you as it becomes available.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.